Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director here at Word on Fire. Bishop Barron is not with us in studio, and so we're sharing today the second half of his talk titled Catholicism and Beauty. We shared the first half in last week's episode, so if you missed that, be sure to go back and listen to that one first. The talk was given at the 2018 Los Angeles Religious Education Congress and shows the role that beauty has played in the Catholic tradition over the centuries. Bishop Barron touches on multiple figures from Bob Dylan to Hans Urs von Balthasar to Thomas Aquinas to the great poet Dante and many more to show how beauty is an effective route of access to God. So we hope you enjoy the second half of this great talk.
This next figure, after a while, all German intellectuals begin to look alike, don't they? That could be Rahner, that could be Tillich, it could be Balthasar. They all begin to look like older men with glasses, you know. But that's a photo of Dietrich von Hildebrand. Dietrich von Hildebrand is, maybe again, not a household name, but one of the really great figures in 20th century Catholicism. Fascinating, a personal story. That man there has a distinct privilege of being, in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's prime enemy. That's true. During the 30s, he was the editor of a magazine, a very anti-Nazi magazine in Austria. And Hitler said at one point, the number one guy I'm against is Dietrich von Hildebrand. That's a signal honor that the wickedest man of the 20th century thought you were his worst enemy. That's high praise, you know. So von Hildebrand was not just an intellectual, but an activist as well. He was chased and finally out of Europe during the awful Nazi period, ended up in this country, where he taught at Fordham for many years. I had the privilege, I don't know if you remember this name, Ewart Cousins, edited that Paulist series on spirituality. Ewart was a wonderful soul. I got to know him. He was a student of Dietrich von Hildebrand. So it was from Ewart that I learned some of his world. But here's why I bring him up. In his writings, he makes a distinction between what he calls the merely subjectively satisfying and the objectively valuable. The merely subjectively satisfying and the objectively valuable. See, this is on the point of, isn't beauty just kind of in the eye of the beholder, just kind of a subjective impression? No, it hinges on this distinction. And now let me make this concrete for you. So last night there was a dinner here for the bishops who were here for the Congress. In fact, I learned last night it's the first time in the history of this Congress that 4 cardinals have been in attendance. So they were there last night. Cardinal Mahoney and Cardinal Tagle, Cardinal, he's the cardinal from El Salvador. I can't remember his last name now. And Cardinal Arborelius from Sweden. So we had 4 cardinals at the dinner. And the bishops were there. Okay. Well, it's Friday during Lent, right? And you're looking at a fish hater. My Irish grandmother was actively allergic to seafood, and I don't have quite that, but I think I inherited something of her dislike. See, because to me, when fish comes into the room, it's like garbage has arrived. All right, come on, there are some fish haters, right? There are some fish haters here, I bet. Well, and may I say, for those who don't hate fish, we're the ones that suffer during Lent, right? I mean, the people that like fish, what's the big deal? You go from one favorite dish to another. But see, for people like me, Friday and Lent is hard. Well, anyway, God bless him. Archbishop Gomez knows this about me, so he had arranged for a little special pasta dish for me. God bless him. You know, it's nice of him. Now, here's my point. I hate fish. That's true. But it would never occur to me in a million years to go on a campaign to make sure that nobody else eats fish. Right? It would never occur to me to think, well, that's something that everybody should hold to. Nobody should eat fish. No, I fully recognize that fish is not subjectively satisfying to me. It doesn't appeal to my kind of subjective likes and dislikes. Now, turn it around, and I have the taste of like a 7-year-old. My favorite meal is spaghetti and meatballs. If you were taking me out for dinner, And I studied in France. It's kind of embarrassing. You know, I mean, I like fine wines. I don't know anything about that. Give me a spaghetti and meatballs, I'm delighted. But see, again, it would never occur to me in a million years to go on a campaign to make sure that everybody likes spaghetti and meatballs. Well, of course not. I mean, that's just subjectively satisfying to me, right? Okay, we all understand that category. But, says Dietrich von Hildebrand, there's a distinction between that and the objectively valuable. What's that now? The objectively valuable. That is not something that is contained and corralled by my subjectivity. That is something that is so overwhelming in its value that it rearranges my subjectivity. It changes my subjectivity. Von Balthasar says the beautiful chooses me, it elects me, and then sends me on mission. Spaghetti and meatballs electing me and sending on mission? Come on, that's just subjectively satisfying. The objectively valuable is something before which we kneel, whose primacy and power we acknowledge. Now, I'll give you an example. If you bring somebody into the Sistine Chapel, let's say, hey, look up, and you begin to explain and show some of the Sistine Chapel, and that person were to say, yeah, it's nice, but it's just not my thing. Well, I mean, it's just absurd, right? It just doesn't appeal to me. Or you play them Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, like the second movement of the Seventh Symphony, which is so magnificent. Remember in the movie The King's Speech, is that when the king is giving his speech, they're playing the second movement of the Seventh Symphony. If you introduce that to someone, and they say, no, I just don't like it. Well, then you're wrong. You'd be legitimate to say, right? Because that's not something merely subjectively satisfying. That's something objectively valuable. See, that's what beauty is, everybody. That's what the beautiful is the objectively valuable. That's why things like Gothic cathedrals and rose windows have a soul-transforming influence on people like Lustiger and Paul Claudel and little me on June the 12th, 1989. That's why your whole life can change in the presence of the beautiful. Now let me go from Dietrich von Hildebrand to Nobel laureate and personal hero of mine, Bob Dylan, living, of course, in the confines of our archdiocese in Malibu. He's not quite in my pastoral region, but I wish he were. I wish he were in Santa Barbara, pastoral region. Here's where I put Bob Dylan up there. About 20 years ago, there was an article in Rolling Stone magazine. And they asked, it was a survey article, they asked rock stars themselves, what was the first song that rocked your world? Now, it's a cool question, and I understood immediately what it was getting at. What was the first song? It's very much like Dietrich von Hildebrand. The first song that rocked your world. See, they were not asking, were they, what was the first song you liked? What's the first song you found subjectively satisfying? You know what mine was, by the way? I can tell you exactly what it was. Remember the Archies? Sugar, sugar. Sugar, do-do-do-do-do-do. Oh, honey, honey. Remember? See? It's popular. You don't want me to go out, believe me. To this day, if I'm driving out to Santa Barbara or something and that song came on the radio, I'd get into it, sugar, sugar. I still like it. But look, I knew that's not the song that rocked my world. I liked it, The first song that rocked my world was Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. I remember hearing it for the first time. I was a freshman in college. I was 17. And that song came, I forget, on the radio or record, I forget how it was. I heard that song, and I had to hear it over and over and over again. And I've been listening to that song for 40-some years and still trying to understand it. Not long ago, I read an account by Patti Smith, the rocker, who's a very articulate writer. In fact, she performed at the ceremony when Bob Dylan got the Nobel Prize. But Patti Smith talked about when she first heard Like a Rolling Stone, she was in her car. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and just sat down on the curb with her head in her hands. I totally get that. I totally... Sugar, sugar, I like it. It would never make me pull the car over and sit down and muse on the meaning of life. You know what I mean? But Like a Rolling Stone did and does. Why? Because there's a difference between the subjectively satisfying and the objectively valuable. And beauty belongs to that extraordinary category. Okay. That's the second part of my talk. We're moving along here. Okay. Oh, Thomas Aquinas. I go from one hero to another, Bob Dylan to Thomas Aquinas. Thomas said, the beautiful occurs at the intersection of three things: integritas, consonantia, and claritas. His Latin for, I'd say, integritas is like wholeness. Consonantia, I'd maybe render as harmony. Consonare, to sound together. And claritas, I'd render as radiance or splendor. When wholeness, harmony, and splendor come together, you have the beautiful. Whether it's a beautiful face, a beautiful day, a beautiful experience, a beautiful catch, if you're watching a football player. Integritas, consonantia, claritas. When they come together, we say, that's beautiful. This is for golfers. Like most amateur golfers, I like playing golf. I'm terrible at it. But I like playing golf, and I like watching golf. And of course, people love to analyze the golf swing, don't they? And you can tell in a second when an amateur is swinging the club, can't you? In a second, you can tell, well, that's an amateur. And you can tell a pro. What do you notice about a pro golf swing? It has integritas. It's about one thing. You know what I'm saying? My golf swing is about many things. It begins here, but a proper golf swing has wholeness. More to it, it has consonantia. Every element in the swing is in a harmonious relationship to every other element. In bad golf swings, the rest of us, we're at odds with ourselves. That's why we hit the ball so poorly. And then finally, a beautiful golf swing has splendor. You say, like, now that's a golf swing, right? There's something radiant about it. It is no accident whatsoever that we put halos around saints. Why? Because the saint's life has integritas, wholeness. It's got consonantia. Every element of it fits together with every other element. And that leads us to say, look, how splendid. Wholeness, harmony, and radiance. Okay, from Thomas Aquinas to John Madden. Do you remember him? He's been off the scene now for a little while, but the great football announcer. This is many years ago. I was watching a football game that he was announcing. And, John Madden liked the rough and tumble guys. He didn't like the sort of svelte running backs. He liked the linemen that were down there, in the line. So he's commenting on the game, and the camera is going along the sidelines, and it finds this figure. It wasn't this guy, but I'm going to show him. It was like this guy. It found this lineman, and he had the jersey was all kind of ripped. He had the black stuff under the eyes, sweating, helmet off, hair all messed up, standing like this, And John Madden said, "Now there's a beauty." And I always think of that when I read Thomas Aquinas on the beautiful. What was he noticing? Wholeness, harmony, and radiance. That football player he was about one thing. He was gathered around the one task of being a lineman. Every element that made him up fit together. There was a harmoniousness about his way of being. And it led John Madden in a kind of burst of joy to say, there's a beauty. So it can be from the sublime to the ordinary, the objectively valuable, but it's what leads us to say, there's a beauty. And the Catholic tradition has been able to use that now across the centuries. Let's go from that football player to Plato. I know Plato's a complicated figure here because in one way, Plato's against the arts. When you read him, he thinks that arts move us further away from the forms. So there's that element of Plato. But there's another stream in Plato that's been hugely influential. And it comes from his great dialogue, the Symposium. Most of us read the Republic if we're in philosophy class. But take the time, it's much shorter to read the Symposium, which is a dialogue between a lot of people who are sitting around drinking late one night, except for one lady around the table, whose name is Diotima. And that's a depiction of Diotima. Well, she gives a speech. The whole thing's about the nature of love, right? That's what the Symposium's about. What's the nature of love? She gives a speech which has been extraordinarily influential in the Western tradition. And I'm going to read you a little bit of it. Here's from Plato's Symposium. Diotima began. The candidate for this initiation, she's talking here about the initiation into the beautiful. How do you understand the beautiful? The candidate for this initiation cannot, if his efforts are to be rewarded, begin too early to devote himself to the beauties of the body. She's talking about the particular physical thing, person, or object, right? So you start with this beautiful thing or person, object in front of you. If his preceptor teaches him well, he will fall in love with the beauty of one individual body or thing, so that his passion may give life to noble discourse. You start with the particular, and you notice its beauty, and that begins the journey. But now listen. Next, he must consider how nearly related the beauty of any one body is to the beauty of any other. He will see if he is to devote himself to loveliness of form, it will be absurd to deny that the beauty of each and every body is the same. So now I start with this particular object, but then I begin to see, look, all around, there are similar beautiful things, people, objects, right? So the mind begins the journey outward to other forms of the beautiful. But then listen. Next, Diotima goes on. He must grasp that the beauties of the body are as nothing compared to the beauties of the soul, so that wherever he meets with spiritual loveliness, even in the husk of an unlovely body, he will find it beautiful enough to fall in love with and to cherish. Lovely, isn't it? So now we go from the beauty of the individual to the beauty of all physical things, now to the beauty of the soul, to the beauty of the spiritual realm. But now listen as it goes on. And from this, he will be led to contemplate the beauty of laws and institutions. So now the mind's going out further and further to ever more horizons of the beautiful. And next, she goes on, his attention should be diverted from institutions to the sciences, so that he may know the beauty of every kind of knowledge. See, we start with the particular and we go out, out, out to ever wider horizons of what's beautiful. And then I love this. This will influence, I'll show you in a second, the whole tradition. Diotima says, and finally, turning his eyes toward the open sea of the beautiful itself, he will find in such contemplation the seed of the most fruitful discourse and the loftiest thought. From this particular beautiful object, body, person, to all other objects and bodies, then to institutions, then to laws, then to sciences, and finally out to the open sea. How wonderful, infinite. The open sea of the beautiful itself. You see what she's doing here in this magnificent speech. How the particular beautiful leads us, if we allow it, to the source and horizon of the beautiful itself, which we recognize as God. That's what was happening to Jean-Marie Lustiger and to Paul Claudel and to me that day in June of 1989. It's what happens if you allow it whenever you experience the beautiful. Okay. This wonderful move by Diotima, and if you remember no one or nothing else from my speech, remember her and look her up on the web or something and find that great speech. I've just read a few things from it. But see, this Platonic move is mimicked many centuries later by this great figure. Again, one of my intellectual heroes, Dante. You know the wonderful story of Dante and Beatrice, right? Beatrice, we say in English. It sounds so banal, doesn't it, in English? Beatrice sounds so beautiful. Dante met Beatrice when he was 9 and she was 8. But it was like Paul Claudel in the North Rose window. It was like John Madden with the lineman. He saw Beatrice, and he was so overwhelmed by her beauty that she just came to dominate his thought, his heart. He dedicated his life at the age of 9 to her in the chivalric manner of the Middle Ages, right? He would sing her praises. Then he did not see her, talk to her for 9 years until this famous scene, which is not coming up as I hit the button. Oh, come on, don't stop here. There it goes. Great. 9 years later, so he's 18, she's 17. This is Beatrice and 2 friends. They're walking along the Arno, the great river in Florence. Dante, there in the little cap, spots them. Beatrice kind of gave him one little look across the shoulder, exchanged 1 or 2 words. It was enough to change his whole life, her beauty. He writes in the wake of that experience this wonderful book called La Vita Nuova, the new life. I bet there are people in this room, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I've been trying to hint at it in this talk inadequately, but you know what I mean. That when you've experienced the beautiful, think of Patti Smith sitting on the curb with her head in her hand, that a new life opens up when the beautiful chooses us and elects us and sends us on mission, right? That's Balthazar. A new life opens up. Why? Because this individual beautiful object or thing or whatever has now opened me implicitly to God, the source of all beauty. What does Dante say at the end of the Vita Nuova? I will write a poem for her more beautiful than any poem ever written. And by God, he did. Right? The Commedia, the Divine Comedy, is a hymn of praise to Beatrice. But see, what does Beatrice do in that great poem? After Dante's been led through hell and up the Mount of Purgatory, he comes now for his journey into heaven, his journey to God. Who comes to guide him but Beatrice from her heavenly place and leads him on the journey into God? So it goes from Diotima now to Dante. Is the beautiful can lead us now to an experience of God. How wonderful, by the way, go back to Bob Dylan for a second. Remember his great song, Tangled Up in Blue? Any Bob Dylan fans here? Do you remember? She opened up a book of poetry and handed it to me. It was written by an Italian poet from the 13th century, and every one of those words rang true and glowed like burning coal, pouring off of every page like it was written in my soul, from me to you, tangled up in blue. Where's he getting that from? The book of written by an Italian poet from the 13th century, Dante. He's reading the Divine Comedy, which lit a fire in him. What happened to Bob Dylan, by the way? Soon after he wrote that song, he became a Christian. He was led to a deeper experience of God. So it goes. So it goes. Okay, one more little stop here on this journey. Next we come to this great figure of James Joyce, and appropriately on St. Patrick's Day to celebrate this Irish figure. Born and raised a Catholic, of course, repudiated the faith sort of publicly and officially, but I agree with the many people that say he never really stopped being a Catholic, and that the Catholic spirit runs all through James Joyce. That'd be a talk maybe for another day at Congress. But I want to draw your attention simply to one famous scene in Joyce's great book, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Remember that wonderful text. Young Joyce has just decided that he's not going to be a priest. He had thought about that. He's trying to figure out, now, what do I do with my life? What do I become? And he's walking on the Strand, he always calls it the beach, right, outside of Dublin. And he spies a young, beautiful girl standing out in the surf. Listen now to his description. A girl stood before him in midstream, alone and still, gazing out to sea. What are we made to think of here? But Diotima, looking out at the open sea of the beautiful itself, right? Now listen. She seemed like one whom magic had changed into the likeness of a strange and beautiful seabird. Her long, slender legs were delicate as a crane's and pure, save where an emerald trail of seaweed had fashioned itself as a sign upon her flesh. Her slate blue skirts were kilted boldly about her waist and dovetailed behind her. Her long hair was girlish and touched with the wonder of mortal beauty, her face. Listen again now. She was alone and still, gazing out to sea. And when she felt his presence and the worship of his eyes, her eyes turned to him in quiet sufferance of his gaze. Long, long she suffered his gaze, and then quietly withdrew her eyes and bent them toward the stream. There she is, this beautiful girl, looking out to the open sea. Joyce sees her isolated. Integritas. He describes all the elements that makes up her beautiful figure. Consonantia. And then, listen, comes claritas. "O heavenly God," cried Stephen's soul, that's the author, in an outburst of profane joy. From Diotima through Dante to Joyce, everybody, that's the rhythm, is the beautiful thing, person, object in front of us. This particular beautiful thing can lead us now to the open sea of the beautiful itself. Looking at the beautiful thing, we can say, if we've got the eyes and the mind and the heart to take it in, we can say, "Oh, heavenly God." It's a route of evangelization. Okay, just a couple more stops on this little journey, and then we'll bring it to a close. A really, really good example of what I've been talking about is, I think, the greatest Catholic novel of the 20th century. And I've been talking largely about visual art so far, but heck, we could do a whole thing here on literary. Well, Dante, of course, is great literary art, Bob Dylan too, music, all these different forms. But this is, of course, Evelyn Waugh, the author of Bride's Head Revisited, which I think is the finest Catholic novel of the 20th century. Look at the next one here. On the right that's that very young Jeremy Irons. That's that splendid PBS production from the early 1980s, which reproduces practically every scene in the novel, A Bride's